Welcome to the show. You're listening to the Young and Angry podcast, and today we're going to be talking about jobs for millennials and how younger generations are being judged harshly for something that's completely out of their control. Stay tuned for more. So a lot of times I hear people from older generations, baby boomers and Gen Xers, talking about how millennials and Gen Z, everyone in the younger demographic is addicted to cell phones and computers and social media and the internet and all this. And I just wanted to talk about why I think that might be, why it might be that way. And I think it all comes down to crappy jobs that don't pay very well, really high cost of living. I think that is completely the reason why so many people are so engulfed with social media and technology, because honestly, it's basically the cheapest entertainment you can possibly have. Because I don't know, I'm in my 20s, and not many people I know are beyond living paycheck to paycheck. Almost everyone I know is kind of just barely scraping by, not really they're not doing that fantastic. And if you compare it to years ago, it seems like everyone was doing really well 30, 40 years ago, because the cost of living was lower and wages were pretty similar to what they are now, or just as good compared to the cost of living. They were even better. And I have it pulled up right here on Statista.com. We've got the average median household income in the United States from 1990 to 2018. Now, the way that they define their income includes, let's see what they say here. This includes income of the householder and any individuals aged 15 or over living in the household. Income includes wages and salaries, unemployment insurance, disability payments, child support, regular rental receipts, blah, 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 a few other things, but also includes personal business and investments or any other kinds of money routinely received. So this would include things like stock market investments and other things like that. So this actually skews this number quite a bit based on a lot of people who potentially make a lot of money on investments through the stock market and different things like that. But for 2018, that's the most recent one that they have on here. I believe this was posted. This was posted in September 2019. So the most recent data they have is 2018, and the average household income in the United States was $63,179. And if you go back even to, let's see, we'll go back to 2010. So it was $55,520. So that was 10 years ago. So what is that? About $8,000 less. For 10 years. So, and then we'll get to the consumer expenses here in a minute. So about $8,000 in 10 years. But then you go back even to, let's see, what is this, 2007? So I guess I would have been right before everything got weird. 59,000. Let's go all the way back. Here's one. 1999, average income was 60,000. So very, very close to what it is right now. You all the way back to 1990. So 28 years ago. And the income was still $54,621. So you're only talking $9,000 less in 28 years. That's really not a huge difference compared to the cost of things 28 years ago. If you look at the cost of things brand new back in 1990, just things in general were significantly cheaper for the most part. So let's go to still on Statista.com, we've got the average annual consumer expenditures of consumers in the United States from 1990 to 2018. So keeping in mind that in 1990, the average median income was $54,621. So the average annual consumer expenditures, which they include, basically the source includes your cost of living is essentially what it is. So in 1990, the average consumer expenditure was $28,000 compared to the $54,000 income. So almost double, right there around double. If you go forward to all the way to 2018, average consumer expenditures in 2018 are $61,224. compared to the 63,000 annual income. So you're only talking $2,000 ish that essentially you could save essentially $2,000 a year. That's it. As opposed to 1990 where you were essentially saving $25,000-ish. There's a big difference between what you can do if you're spending half of your income on living as opposed to spending like 98% of it on living. It's a big difference in extracurricular activities, things that you can do after work. You're not going to be doing much if you're spending almost all of your money on just living, including rent. And the thing is that the cost of living has gone so much, especially rent, in the areas where there are decent-ish paying jobs. There's a lot of jobs that seem like they pay decent. Like one that I had checked into at one point was Java programming, which part of the big sell for becoming a Java programmer is that they start off at about $100,000 a year. If you look up the actual jobs, though, to get paid $100,000, $120,000 as somewhat of an entry-level Java programmer, you're going to have to move to the places where they do that kind of stuff, like the Bay Area in California, LA, basically Silicon Valley in the Bay Area is where you're going to end up for the most part if you want that $100,000 a year starting job. But even right here on Statista, they actually say that someone in San Jose would require about $99,400 per year to live comfortably. So right off the bat, your $100,000 a year job, which is before taxes, so you make $100,000 a year before taxes, and so it's like you're making six figures. That's kind of always been the holy grail of jobs, is making six figures. So you're making six figures, but then after taxes, you technically can't even live by yourself. You couldn't have your own place. You're most likely not going to be driving a new car. And you're making $100,000 a year, but you're spending $80,000 just to live there. Rent in San Jose is insane. The cost of rent over there. That's partially why I never actually got into Java programming. And even on Statista, they also say in San Antonio, Texas, it would require about $58,000 per year to live comfortably. But then right back to the average income was $63,000. So you're still, even in San Antonio, you'd be spending almost everything you make just to live. But even that statistic is kind of skewed because when you add in all the people who are potentially technically have an income that's in the millions, and then you take that and include that into the statistic, that skews the number quite a bit. Of course, there's going to be people on the census and whatnot that are not making hardly any money or potentially not making any money. And if they are on the census as well, then they're skewing the numbers. But someone who's, if your income is potentially $10 million a year, you're skewing it a whole lot more than a lot of people making $10,000 a year. And part of what I'm getting at here is that there are not many high-paying jobs left anymore. If you're not a corporate executive, which you're not going to be getting in your 20s or probably even 30s for the most part, unless you're extremely special, then you're not going to be making that much money. I mean, blue-collar jobs are pretty much gone. That's always been kind of a nice thing, at least back when my dad was working 10 plus years ago. He retired about 10 years ago. He had a blue-collar job. He worked hard. He was in heavy construction, and he made good money for working hard. It seemed like a fair trade-off. You work really hard, you get paid pretty well. But that's not even the case anymore. Good example would be something that I've done a lot as a hobby as well as professionally is welding. I've done a lot of welding, structural welding, artistic welding, all kinds of different welding. And I've heard people talk about the six-figure welding jobs. I've actually never in my life run across anyone who actually makes six figures unless they work someplace. There's a lot of different shops that'll do 6 days a week, 9 to 10 hour shifts, and that's just standard. That's not like overtime. That's just standard. Your standard week is going to be 60 hours or so. So even if you're doing that and you're making $100,000 a year, it's like, good for you. You don't have any time to enjoy it. So what's the point? I have never met anyone working 40 hours a week as a welder or in construction that makes $100,000 a year. But from what I hear, they're out there, but I have never met one. And I've worked in a lot of different shops, welding and fabricating and doing steel work. And I have never actually met anyone who made even close to that. The most I've ever met was a guy who made about $80,000 a year. And that was really only because he basically ran the shop. He wasn't the owner, but if it wasn't for him, that whole shop would have fallen apart in a matter of days. But that just goes to show that something as important as welding, almost everything you will touch has had welding involved at some point. Whether or not, if it's a plastic thing that you're working on or that you're using, a cell phone, whatever it is, at some point a welder was involved at some stage in the process, in the manufacturing process. Maybe not for that actual thing that you're using, but the machine that made the thing, the assembly line, the conveyor belts, everything that goes into the factory that makes your iPhone. At some point, there was a welder involved in all that. And it's a vital job. There's no way you can possibly get anything done without welders. And yet, on average, it's pretty uncommon to find jobs that I've ever seen that are over $25 an hour, which equates to roughly $50,000 a year before taxes. And especially with something like welding, there's no way anyone can pull the millennials or lazy card. I mean, it's a pretty, if nothing else, it takes talent to weld properly. It takes skill and talent and time to learn to weld properly. So you can't pull the, you're not making enough money because you're not working hard enough. I know a lot of high quality welders who are making $20 an hour, and that's just not, it doesn't cut it in most places. It's just not that high paying for something that's so important and that does take time and skill and energy to perfect. Another good example is CNC machining, which, if you don't know what that is, it's the computerized machines that cut metal. It's what they use to make molds and pretty much everything. Once again, like welding, everything at some point has been through some sort of a CNC machine. 3D printers are technically CNC machines, but I'm talking the metal cutting ones that produce like car engine blocks and weapons and tanks and airplanes and that kind of stuff. And even those, for the most part, to be a CNC operator, which granted isn't a super difficult job if you're just technically an operator, because that just means you're running the machine, which isn't nearly as difficult as it might sound. But even still, I've seen countless CNC operator jobs where they're paying $13 to $15 an hour for you to run a CNC machine. And a production CNC machine will run you close to $100,000 to purchase. So you are responsible to run a $100,000 machine that can kill you quite easily if you screw up and you do something stupid. And also, you can destroy the thing in a matter of seconds if you screw up and do something stupid. And so they're letting people run these machines and expecting them to put out this high quality work for $13 to $15 an hour. There's literally a gas station in my hometown that's offering $13 to $15 an hour to work at a gas station. Why on earth would I want to be responsible for anything if I'm going to be getting paid the same amount to stand behind a cash register? That's one of the main reasons why I don't do CNC machining. I did it for a while. I had my own machine. I worked for one shop, and the guy who ran the shop was absolutely terrible at it. It was painful to watch, and I was getting paid pretty poorly. I was getting paid significantly more because I was welding on top of that. But even still, when you're talking about welding, which is a talent and a skill in and of its own, and machining on a CNC machine, and metal fabrication, and we did some other stuff, lots of other little things in the process because it was basically a prototype shop, and all of that to get paid $25 an hour. So basically $50,000 a year to weld, CNC machine. I did a lot of tech work in the office and a lot installing a lot of projects and things. All of that for a whopping $50,000 a year, and that was in Tennessee, where I was spending the vast majority of that just living in a nice spot. It wasn't even like a really, really high-end spot. It was still an apartment. It was a nice apartment, but it was still an apartment. So that right there is 3 industries that are extremely important. We've got the computer industry, programming, and Java's not even an easy programming, not really an easy programming language. It's more powerful than a lot of other lower level scripting languages and stuff. So an important programming position that barely pays enough to live in the places that you have to be to get these programming jobs, and welding jobs that barely pay enough anywhere to even, they don't pay enough to live in a cheap place anywhere in the country for the most part by yourself and live decently, and machining jobs, which also pay terribly. And those are three vital careers, each one of which you should, it's a essential blue collar job. Not everyone wants to be a CEO. So this is a job that anyone fresh out of high school could be taught how to do this job. And you shouldn't have to go to college to make a decent living. Maybe you won't be driving a $100,000 truck and living in $1 million mansion, but you should at least be able to buy a nice looking house in a nice neighborhood, drive a decent car. Maybe it's going to be a newer Honda or something, but still, you shouldn't have to live in an apartment with roommates, driving used cars, and doing an incredibly vital job that keeps this country ticking. It's ridiculous. I know so many people that work and go home and play computer games and video games, and that's what they do. That's their entire life, is they go to work and they go home, and they, on their days off, in the evenings, mornings, whenever it is that they're not working, they're basically playing video games. They go for walks. They do, sad to say it, pretty boring stuff compared to the other things in life that there are to do, because they're not getting paid enough for their jobs to actually afford to do anything. They're just trying to live without going completely broke. Most people, a lot of people in the US don't have much of a savings account. I'm shocked to find out more and more every day that how few people actually have a savings account or anything in it enough to cover any sort of expenses for anything. But it all boils down to, not all millennials are lazy. Not all of us just want to sit around and play video games all day. But unfortunately, with the income and the cost of living on average, that's pretty much all there is to do. And it's pretty sad, because so many of these jobs are important, vital jobs, but the people that own the companies, own the businesses, they just don't want to pay, because what it really boils down to is that they're greedy. One of the many welding shops that I worked at, the guy that he complained all the time about not making enough money. All the welders that were working there were very good welders and fabricators. We did a lot of really good work on a lot of really cool projects, and all of us were making right around $20 an hour. So about $40,000 a year, which is not really enough to cover the area that we were all living in for that shop. And the owner complaining about not making enough money. He owned two $1 million houses. He had bought one while I was working there, a new $1 million house to go along with his other $1 million house. And he was complaining about not making enough money when he had two $1 million houses, a condo right around the street from the shop. I don't even know why, because both the houses that he owned were within, one of them was within like 15 minutes of the shop. The other one was within 45 minutes, but he owned a condo right around the street that was about 2 minutes from his shop. It's like, I don't know why. Drove an $80,000 Jeep, had the new Tesla. It wasn't the Model 3. It was like the $80,000 one, the Model X or whatever it is. A lot of really expensive stuff, constantly complaining about not making enough money when he's paying all of his guys $20 an hour. And that's partially why pretty much everyone ended up quitting at one point, because everyone just got tired of dealing with it. Weren't making enough money to really cover expenses. First sign of anything that paid better, everyone was gone. And that's another problem that's been in a lot of articles and a lot of different media outlets recently in the last few years, is millennials and younger people just job hopping and going in, getting a job, working there for a couple weeks, couple months, whatever, and then they just stop showing up. And I can tell you exactly why that happens. it's because they got a better offer, and most likely wherever they were, they weren't getting paid enough to make it worth their while. Most of the people that I know, they'll take just about any job if they're in the market and they need a job. They'll take just about anything because they have bills to pay. And like I said before, most people do not have a savings account that can cover even a month of their living expenses without a job. So they'll take whatever job comes up first and they'll work it. But as soon as a better offer comes up, more money, closer to home, better hours, whatever comes up, they're most likely just going to jump ship and take it. And most people, since if you're not getting paid well and you're not getting treated well, that's another big factor that's kind of separate. But if you're not getting paid well or treated well, nobody really has this. I don't know where the idea that this innate owing someone, like this loyalty and owing someone something for giving you a job. It's like, you're not paying me that well. You're not treating me that well. I'm just going to stop showing up. The whole 2-week notice thing, I've given my 2-week notice plenty of times, but depending on how things went after that was really determined whether or not I even kept showing up. Because why would anyone want to show up if they're not getting paid well and they're not getting treated well? It's like, well, I could start this job tomorrow, or I can suffer here for 2 more weeks, not getting paid as well as I would over there tomorrow. It's like, yeah, I quit. I'm gone. Bye. At some point, these business owners and a lot of the older generation that had it pretty easy for a long time, I'll say, they need to learn that you can't just pay people barely what it takes to live and expect them to work as hard as they can or stick around for any extended period or care at all, because there's really no incentive if they're not getting compensated properly for the work that they're putting in. As a good example, that welding shop and also the CNC machining shop and plenty of others that pay roughly $20 an hour. So roughly $20 an hour after taxes around here is about $700 a week, $700 to $800 a week. So you're making, what is that, about $3,200 a month ish after taxes roughly. So just looking here on Zillow to see what the rough pricing is for rentals in this area, I'm only seeing a few. There's really not that many if you filter for a reasonable price. And there's one for $1,800 a month and $1,900 a month. So, and those aren't even like super nice houses or anything. Those are apartments. Or one of them might be a house, but both of them are not. It's not like it's a super spectacular place. And $1,900. So if you're making $3,200 and you're spending $1,900 on rent alone, so there's more than half of your income right there. And then even to buy a semi-cheap car, or at least an inexpensive, nice car, you're looking at roughly $30,000 brand new. There are cheaper ones out there, but if you're going above base model and above a subcompact or something like that, you're probably looking at about $30,000 for the car, which roughly, for at least most of the cars that I've dealt with, that's roughly $400 a month. So you got $1,900 for rent for a decent place, about $400 a month in a car payment for a decent car. So now you're up to $2,300 right there out of your $3,200. So you've got $900 left roughly. And then you add in your car insurance, which is, it's a little higher around here for some reason. I don't know why, but I pay roughly $150 to $200 a month, depending on what car it is. So you're looking at another $200 there, we'll say. So now you're down to $700 left out of your income. And then you have to add on food, which for one person is probably gonna be another $400. So now you're down to $300 out of your income. If you got phone, internet, electricity, all the other stuff, you're basically down to zero. So as a welder, a very important job that needs to be done, that people cannot live without welders, and you can't live by yourself in this area because the rent is so incredibly high and the cost of pretty much anything is super high. And you shouldn't have to, as a blue collar worker, you shouldn't have to buy used cars and live in small little apartments. Back 50, 60 years ago, a blue collar job working in a factory at GM or Ford or something like that, you could most likely you're going to own a house. As a millennial, you might as well just forget that, because that's probably never going to happen for you. But back in the 50s and 60s, you could probably own a house, probably a pretty nice house in a decent area. Most likely you're going to have a couple cars. Maybe one of them's new, maybe one of them's used. I mean, that was like the typical story for back in those days. From everything that both my parents have told me about their childhoods, that was how it was. Factory jobs for their parents, union factory jobs, and that was life. It was just pretty typical that people were getting paid well and living well, and you didn't have to go to college and have a bachelor's degree to get a decent job. And even a bachelor's degree doesn't really get you much anymore. And especially where you get the higher paying jobs when you do have an education is most likely in a place that's so expensive to live. Like the whole Java programming thing in San Jose, where you make $100,000 a year, spend $80,000 just living. But overall, it just comes down to not all millennials are lazy. Not all of us want handouts. Not all of us are addicted to social media because we really enjoy it. Sometimes you just can't afford to do much else. Sitting around and watching Netflix is a whole lot cheaper than going out and going to a bar. Even that's expensive. Going to do pretty much any activity is expensive. A lot of concerts are pretty expensive. I mean, in the scope of things, if you're paying $50 for a ticket, that's kind of expensive in the scope of things. And if you wanted to get into like motorcycle racing or something like that, that's insanely expensive. Just so many outdoor activities. Even around here, one of the big things they have is paddleboarding. I don't know why it looks boring, but paddleboarding, I've seen the paddle boards and they're like over $1,000 for a paddleboard. And then you just go out on the lake and you just paddle around. Some people, I guess, enjoy that. I think it's kind of boring. But when the most entertaining thing you can do that you can easily afford without breaking the bank or without constantly running yourself into debt is sit around and watch YouTube all day, unfortunately, that's what most people end up doing because it's the easiest option. And hopefully one of these days it changes, but until people start realizing that nothing out there really pays that well, nothing's going to change. I don't even really know what millennials can do to change it. But I do know it is going to take a group effort from pretty much everyone, millennials, Gen Z, and even Gen X, baby boomers. All those people are going to have to do something at some point, whether it's a union or something about the wages versus the cost of living, because if it keeps going at this rate, wages haven't really gone up much, but the cost of living has gone up considerably. So it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse the longer it goes on. This was the first episode of the Young and Angry podcast, so if you liked it, make sure to download, leave us a like, send us any comments or feedback that you might have, and thanks for listening.